This is episode 6 of Youthful Perspectives. I'm your host, Mason Beerbaum. My guest today is an optimistic entrepreneur, world traveler, a decades-long mentor, and the host of the 12 Geniuses podcast, Don MacPherson. Our conversation covers many topics, like the lessons of travel, the joys of running a team-oriented business, the importance of mentors and empathy, the future of technology, and our optimistic outlooks on the future. Don's authentic enthusiasm about the advancements our society currently experiences is a breath of fresh air amongst the negative rhetoric circulating through the media and politics. With Election Day only a few short weeks away, I find this conversation extremely useful in how we can navigate these historic times. If you'd like to learn more about the positive ways to engage in this election cycle, check out Don's most recent season on 12 Geniuses, titled Debate Without Hate, 2024 Election. With that, here's Don MacPherson. Well, thank you, Don, for joining me today. I appreciate it. We'll start off with the first question here. Could you describe what your childhood was like in northern Minnesota?
I grew up in the 1970s in a town called White Lakes, Minnesota, on the Iron Range. And to describe the town, it was a mining community, a lot of working class people, hardworking people. My particular upbringing was paycheck to paycheck. Economically, I would say insecure. There was a point in my childhood where my stepdad was laid off for nearly 5 years, and he cobbled together a living for our family. And I think what's important to think about during my childhood is, number one, I was observing somebody who would do anything to provide for his family, which I truly admire in my stepdad, and that's something that I have internalized and tried to do as well. The other thing to keep in mind, or that might be useful and valuable for the listeners, is two people can grow up in the same household and have two entirely different experiences. So I found a lot of joy, and I think that my childhood was pretty ideal, despite maybe some of the circumstances that we grew up in, whereas maybe my sisters would give you a different perspective or point of view. And I think I find that to be interesting as a parent, too, to remember that two people can go through the same situation, be in the same household, experience the same things, and it's important to find out, how are you feeling about this? What did you see? Tell me how you're feeling. And so I think that's pretty interesting to note about my upbringing. But in general, I was taught hard work will get you ahead. And I was also told that I would go on to school. And so that was really important to me, is to better myself and go to college, even though nobody in my family had gone to college prior to that.
So you'd say that growing up in the mining community, watching your stepdad grind it out, try to provide a income or a comfortable living situation for your family, that made a profound impact on you. And you also developed the trait of empathy, and knowing that you had a great experience, but your sister might not have had the same one too, and be able to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Very important for later on down in life, I would say. Would you say that was some powerful aspects of your youth that helped shape your worldview?
Well, the empathy probably came later. Yeah. And it was something that I discovered, that my sisters had a different experience than I did. And I am very grateful for where we grew up. There weren't a lot of opportunities other than to work in the mine. And I actually did work in the mine for 2 summers. And that really told me, or taught me, this is not something that you want to do with your life. You need to get an education. It was during my summer between my freshman and sophomore year, and between my sophomore and junior year. And I saw these guys, and they said, get back to school, study. They were really encouraging me, saying, you don't want to spend 30 or 40 years of your life doing this work. And it was really difficult work in terms of, it was hot and dirty. And there were points in the mine where it was at least 140 degrees. And I had on steel toe boots and jeans and a hard hat and t-shirt, and we were shoveling, and there's 2 lines of taconite flowing by, and that's the condition that we were working in. I'd go to the lunchroom and it would be 80 degrees in the lunchroom, and I'd be freezing just because I'd come from a place that was 120, 130, 140 degrees. So that really taught me a work ethic and what I wanted to do and to create a different vision for my life. The other thing, you talked about worldview, and this was a very isolated place. Mm-hmm. We didn't know what the world had to offer us. And it was just kind of like a blind vision that we had. There was something better out there, but we didn't necessarily know what it was. And I say we because I'm talking about some of my classmates, really smart people who have gone on to do some incredible things with their lives. None of us really knew that this existed, that city life existed, that affluence existed. A new car for us was a new to us car. We knew somebody had to own it the first time. But it wasn't us. You know what I mean? So, those types of things were pretty interesting. And I would say there was a bit of a blind faith in terms of there's a better way to live, another way to live, and it doesn't have to be as difficult as what we experienced.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned working in the mines and the warning that these fellow miners were giving you on how you got to stay in school, you don't want to be doing this, and also the fact that there's that world that you have not yet experienced that's out there. So you got those two things coming together, motivating you to work hard, go out and do great things. That's gonna be very powerful for someone at the age of. I'm sure you knew that about the world going out, that there was more out there than just what's up in northern Minnesota, but to know that there's that much out there to explore and to see and experience, that's got to be very powerful for someone at that young of an age. But you mentioned going to college, and you went to St. Cloud State University, and you studied mass communications and histories. Why did you select those fields of study?
Well, my freshman year, I went to Bemidji State University, and there I played basketball. And it was a walk-on freshman, and decided that this was not the place for me. I wanted to go to a slightly bigger school, so I went to St. Cloud State. And I knew that I wanted to be a television reporter, or that's what I thought I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And that was my major, so I did a lot of daytime news shows and then did all of the reporting for my major. And then I also majored in history, and I figured that the two might go well together. And so that's why I chose that track. I also studied abroad my senior year, my fifth year in school. So I could have graduated in 4 years. I decided to study abroad my fifth year and then double major. And so then I went to Denmark. And that was a very, very important time of my life as well, to study, to travel to the Soviet Union a month before it collapsed, to go to Italy, to go to Spain, to go many, many parts of Europe. That really opened my eyes to what was possible, and what was possible for me, not for somebody who might have been affluent and who had parents who were pushing them, but this idea that, not only is it possible for me, but I can do this on my own. Mm-hmm. So that was a very formative time for me. And I'll also back up to meeting a friend of mine who took me to Alaska in 1990. Mm-hmm. So we drove from Minnesota to Alaska. I didn't think that this was possible, but he had done it before. He's originally from Sri Lanka. He lived in London for a while, and then he came to Minnesota to study, and he corralled about 19 of us to go on this trip to Alaska in 1990. And that was the first time that I had really traveled by myself or without my parents. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, you can do this? Mm-hmm. And then a year later, I was studying in Denmark, and I was like, the world had really opened up to me. It was really quite a formative experience for me.
Yeah, from the mines of northern Minnesota to
Right.
Denmark and Soviet Union. I mean, a month before it collapsed, what was that experience like? That would have been profound.
It was a very dour situation. I can remember it being very gray. Everything was gray. We celebrated Thanksgiving. So obviously they're not celebrating Thanksgiving in the Soviet Union, but there were a handful of American kids there, 8 or 9 of us, and we celebrated Thanksgiving. And we celebrated it at McDonald's, the first McDonald's in Moscow. And it was just a very unhappy time for the people there. And growing up in Minnesota, growing up during the 70s and 80s, having the Miracle on Ice in 1980, the U.S. hockey team winning the gold medal, we viewed the Soviet Union as the evil empire. We did. And we saw these soldiers being very desperate and acting in strange ways, selling things. And we were like, this is what we feared? I was thinking to myself, this is what we feared? And it was just a time of turmoil in that country, a time of transition, and a transition that was not managed very effectively. And so a lot of the thoughts that we had about what the Soviet Union was, they were misconceptions. And that's an important lesson to learn is, what you might feel about something or somebody, it could be just a front. You have to dig a little bit deeper, and we definitely saw what was under the surface.
Yeah, the experience you described reminds me of Rick Steves. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Sure.
Makes a lot of travel videos, writes travel books. He did a 1-hour video on his travels to Iran, and he talks about how the people there are so welcoming to him. They were saying they love America and all this, and they just couldn't believe there's an American film crew there. But then you walk the streets of Tehran, and there's propaganda of anti-American, anti-Western stuff, and it's like, you see on the news that there's terrible relationships between the government, but the people, if they're able to experience each other, in a personal capacity, can really make some inroads to a more peaceful world, it seems like. So that's kind of what it seemed like you were sort of experiencing in the Soviet Union. Yeah, the people were in a dire situation, but they weren't what you initially thought they were going to be. They weren't that the 10-foot soldier sort of deal. They're more of a paper tiger. Well, I guess at that point they were, coming to the end of their empire, but still is not what you originally thought. So it's another incentive to travel, I think, among many. But we can get into that later. And you mentioned you lived in Germany, and this was after you were done with college. So you must have enjoyed living in Denmark or in Europe enough to want to live there longer. What was that experience like, and what prompted you to want to live out in Germany?
Moving to Germany was really a defining moment to see what I could make of myself. And I've always romanticized the independent person, the person who moves to this country with $20 in their pocket and an idea, and then works hard and grinds and creates a company and creates an empire. Well, this was my opportunity to do something like that. In 1992, I graduated from college. I had moved to Denmark and studied there. And then I got a professional job for about 18 months, worked that, and I realized this is not what I want for my life. I don't want to be working for a Fortune 500 and be a number. I enjoyed the experience. I learned a lot. I met some great people, but I knew I wanted something more. And at that point, I decided I'm going to move to Germany. I'm going to buy a one-way ticket, and I'm going to see what I can make of myself. I put $2,000 in my pocket and got that one-way ticket, sold everything other than what I could pack into a huge duffel bag. Then I moved over there. I knew one person and I spoke about 10 words of German. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give myself a month. And if I can't find a job or a way to produce income, then I'll go to plan B. But I didn't really have a plan B in mind. And I ended up, prior to moving to Germany, I'd done some basketball camps at the University of Wisconsin, and I was talking to one of the coaches, and he said, "Oh, you're moving to Germany?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "I know somebody over there. Give this guy a call when you get there." And I waited about a week and realized, oh my gosh, I might have made a huge mistake here. Yeah. I don't have any prospects. I don't have any relationships. So I give this guy a call, and he starts asking me questions about basketball and what level I had played at. And I said, I played high school basketball and I played Division II basketball, but only as a freshman. It's been a while since I played. And he says, well, you can play over here if you want. And I said, really? And he says, yeah, but we got to get on it right away. He says, let me make some phone calls. Now, he doesn't know who I am. Mm-hmm. He starts making some phone calls. Unbeknownst to me, a week later, a guy calls me and he tells me who he is. He says he coaches this team in a town that I had never heard of. Do I want to try out for the team? And I said, yes. And so a week after that, I traveled by train 3.5 hours from Hamburg, which is where I was staying, to this small town called Zost. And I arrive on a Friday. We have a practice on a Friday night, and we have a tournament, or kind of like a friendly set of games with a couple of teams then. And I was out of shape, and I was rusty and so fatigued. And I think I threw the ball away, turned the ball over several times during the first half, and I had a point. And I was like, well, they're not going to want me to play. And then the second half, I had 19 points. I got my legs under me. I got a second wind, and I was like, oh yes, I can do this. And then the coach went to the owner, or the guy who ran the club, and he says, with Don, we'll be very bad, and with him, I think we have a chance. Mm-hmm. And I ended up playing the whole season. We ended up winning our division, which in Germany, if you win your division, then you can go up to the next level. And I thought, oh, this has been an amazing experience. I planned to go back. My knees were kind of in tough shape at the time, mm-hmm. but I planned to go back, and it just kind of fell apart. And then I came back to the U.S., spent a few months here, worked a little bit, and then went back to Germany and moved my stuff back to the U.S. But what I learned is that I have a different risk profile than most people. Yeah. And this confirmed that, you can take risks and you can be successful. So it gave me a great deal of confidence to try new things and to live a different life than most people are willing to live. And the other positive thing was that I came back with more money than I left with. And, so I would say that experience, more than anything, more than where I grew up, more than attending college, that was one of the experiences that has helped me do some of the other things that I've done in life.
Your experience reminds me of the Teddy Roosevelt Man in the Arena on Daring Greatly. And, it won't be with those poor, timid souls that know neither victory nor defeat. Just that act of going out there, risking it, trying something new, seeing what happens. I mean, that's what your 20s are all about, doing something like that. And that's a great story right there. I did not know that about you. I knew you went and played basketball out in Germany, but I didn't know you took just a duffel bag of belongings, and you took that romantic idea that you had of the individual, $20 coming to America, making the most of themselves. You flipped it and put it on yourself and went back to Europe and did that. That's great. That's very useful for people. But then also that risk profile that you knew of yourself, that seems to translate over well to your entrepreneurial career as well, too.
You think about being in your 20s. I was 25 when I moved there. I turned 26 over there. So I had a few years of experience post-school, but that's the time to do it. Mm-hmm. When your failure your failure is not going to set you back to, or if it sets you back to zero, you didn't get very far anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's fine, but it can propel you to such incredible heights. And I still go back regularly. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how many times I've been to Europe, but probably 50 mm-hmm. at least, and 10 with my oldest daughter. And she's only 8. So my point is, I have some incredible relationships over there. We keep going back to Denmark and to Germany. And I will also say this was a time of my life where I was able to cultivate great relationships and learn how to cultivate great relationships. And that has carried me forward to success in business more than anything else. I wouldn't say that I'm the smartest person or the hardest working person, really, but I'm able to cultivate relationships in a way that they're just enduring. Mm-hmm. And I have relationships with people all around the world, but very special relationships in Denmark and Germany.
Was that something that you were taught growing up, or was it something you were just innately good at? Networking, it seems like, and just getting positive relationships created.
The thing that I learned in college more than anything is how to relate to people and how to create friendships and how to find out what other people are interested in. You just find out what they're interested in, and my goodness, they really warm up to you pretty quickly.
Absolutely.
So that was something that I did learn in college, more than my mass communications degree or my history degree. But as I think about my parents, and I have 4 parents, my mother and father split when I was young, 3 years old, and they got remarried not too long after that. So I was very, very young, and I can only remember them being with their current partners. And so with that in mind, I say I have 4 parents. And I can think about my dad and what gifts he has given me, and that's the ability to talk to anybody. He would just blab and blab with people, and I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? And he was able to find something that could bring that other person and him together. And with my mom, it's this ability to love. She's from an Italian family, and it's a very affectionate family, and the ability to love. And with my dad's wife, it's this ability to carry on no matter how difficult the circumstances are. And my stepdad, just this incredible work ethic. He had this incredible work ethic, a career that extended 40 years. He missed, I think, a half a day of work, and he was throwing up. He was violently ill, and he said, I think this is time to call it a day. And he was back the next day, I'm sure. So I always look at other people and say, nobody's perfect, but what can I take away from these people I admire and apply in my life?
Yeah, that's great. Just that nurture aspect growing up. I mean, that's profound impact to have on your life. And then when you came back to the United States, was it correct, you started a company called Modern Survey. What was that like, being an entrepreneur and starting your first business?
I had started a business prior to that that was reasonably successful. It was the Solopreneur company. I was the only person involved, and I worked that for about 3 or 4 years. And during that time, I met my business partner. And I had 2 business partners at Modern Survey. They were brothers. And I met one of the brothers during this time after Germany. And he had the idea to start Modern Survey to collect data online. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that I wanted an unconventional life. I knew that I did not want to work for other people. I wanted to work for myself. And I've always done that. Now I think I'm on 6 companies. And so we started that business in 1999 with this idea of collecting data online surveys. And that sounds pretty trivial right now because, of course, we all do that all the time. We're sharing our data online. But at the time, it was pretty revolutionary. And we started this company with $3,000. We each pitched in $1,000 and kind of had an idea, but not necessarily a vision for what the future was going to look like, and not with an end in mind. Like we're going to sell this company, we're going to build this company. We just knew that this was something fun and interesting to do at that time, and we were around the age of 30. None of us were married and no children, so we could take some risks. And we built that up over the course of 17 years and maybe had, a few dozen people working for us, companies all over the country, companies all over the world, and we really figured it out. There weren't the resources for how to start a company. There weren't the resources then that there are now. And so we just had to figure things out. And I would say that is one of my skills, and maybe even their skills too. They're artists, I'm an athlete. But figuring things out, navigating the unknown is something that I'm very, very comfortable with. A lot of people are not. But putting together puzzles, and we were just able to navigate downturns like 2001 after 9/11, and then there was a recession that followed that. And then we lost our biggest client that accounted for about 2/3 of our revenue very early in our tenure, probably 2002 or 2003. And then we went through the financial crisis of 2008 and navigated that. While our competition would lay off 30-40% of their workers, we kept every single one of them with this idea that when the economy comes back, we're going to have a full team. They're going to be loyal to us because we kept them, and we're going to be able to put the pedal to the metal and really grow. And that's what we did. We'd come into our stride as leaders right around that time, 2009, 2010. And then in 2012, we had an annual meeting of the shareholders, the three of us. We would go away for a week at a time, and we decided, okay, it's time to sell. And we put a 3-year plan together. We had a dozen different things that we wanted to execute on. We had decided these are the things that are most important for us to sell. And then in 2016, February of 2016, we sold to a company called Aon, which is a big global insurance company. And that happened. I became a dad on the same day. So in February of 2016, we sold my company, and I became a father. And I had been concerned for months about my identity. I really loved being president and owner of this company. And I had gotten a lot of external accolades. I got a chance to speak on these big stages at these big conventions, and I got a chance to meet CEOs and do these really cool things. And I worried, oh my gosh, when I sell, there's going to be some money involved, but I won't have this title. I won't have people knowing when I walk through the door that I'm the owner of this company. That meant a lot to me. So I thought about that. And we sold at 9 a.m. The press release went out. I was talking to reporters. I got a phone call, and it was, Don, where are you? I'm going into labor. I'm like, I'm in the parking lot. I'll be right up. Went up a few hours later. No longer thought about the company.
Oh, yeah.
I'm in, game mode here. And by 5 o'clock, I was a dad. And I never thought about my identity ever again, about being president or owner of this company. It just completely went out the window.
That's the universe almost rewarding you right there to that. I mean, that's a great book ending to a storied career in that company and put so much time and effort into. And then you kind of start this different quote unquote career in being a father, and which is just something that all humans, whether they want to or not, it's just something evolutionary. We desire to be parents to some degree or another. At least we have that capacity. And that seems like this is beautiful right there. It's really what it feels like. It's beautiful.
I agree, and not every entrepreneur has that experience. A lot of entrepreneurs, even though many can become very wealthy after selling their company, they regret selling. They dislike what the new owners are doing with their company. And I wasn't thrilled about everything that the new owners did to our company, but not everybody has that luxury to experience this transition. And I will say, prior to becoming a father, I enjoyed, and not everybody will admit this, but I enjoyed other people admiring what I did, and I got a lot of satisfaction knowing that, they liked when I spoke, or they liked this or that. And so I liked having eyes on me. Now I could care less. The only people I want to impress are those 2 little girls. The only people I want looking up to me are those girls, and I want to do well by them. And so that was transformative for me as well. I got a lot of validation from other people because of this company that I had, but no longer. That no longer mattered to me.
Was that something you've always wanted to do, was be a father, or was that something that came out later in life?
Never. I couldn't have cared less about being a father. And then I met Michelle, and we fell in love, and I knew she wanted to be a mom. And I thought to myself, my goodness, this woman needs to be a mother. She is a great woman, and any child will be lucky to have her as a mom. And so I thought, maybe with her, yeah, let's do it. Not really understanding what I was getting into, thinking that, well, she's going to do the majority of the work. And I guess I didn't really understand what I was getting into, even though have some great friends who are great fathers, I didn't understand the commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And by far, it's the best thing that I've ever done in my life. And I'm so grateful that we are parents. I'm an older dad. I'm 56. I have an 8 and a 6-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish other parents had the luxury of spending as much time with their children as I do, with having the wisdom that I've accumulated over the years, and some scars and some failures without a doubt. But I'm grateful that we made this choice. It's transformed my life.
Yeah, that's something I look forward to myself, just speaking personally. Like, yeah, the 20s, you want to go out and explore the world. 30s, maybe start a business or, professional career. But then later on, you start what seems to be your most, the way you talk about it, at least, one of your most important accomplishments or roles in life is being a parent. And that's
not one of the most
important role. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's just something I look forward to myself. And the way you talk about it, too, it's inspiring as well to someone who wants to do that someday. So, yeah, you talked about the '08 financial crisis and all of that. Was there any most rewarding accomplishment you had at Modern Survey before you guys sold? Something you look back on and you're like, that's something we did right. Whether it's a certain award or a certain way you conducted business, how you kept everyone on during the '08 financial crisis. Is there anything that you pinpoint to something that you're really proud of?
There are a few things. One, I got into business, and this might seem shallow,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll just be honest. I got into business to make money. I did. The way we grew up, it was financial insecurity. I don't think we wanted for anything because there was an abundance of love, but I knew that I didn't want to live paycheck to paycheck. So I knew I wanted to make a lot of money. And I didn't know what a lot of money was, but more than what we had, that's for certain. And then as we started to get people in the business, I realized, making money is great, but I love seeing people grow and develop at this organization and under my leadership or influence or whatever. And I would say the things that stand out the most would be when somebody said, I'm buying a house or we're having a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, oh, wow, you work here. You might be the breadwinner or you're pulling in half the income for your family. I take pride in that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I had no aspirations of being a father at that time, that gave me a great deal of satisfaction and pride,
Mm-hmm.
is knowing that we created something out of nothing with $3,000 and people's lives were depending on this. And they were able to create families and to build lives for themselves. So that is something that fills me with a great deal of pride. Certainly in 2009. So in January of 2009 and February of 2009, we sold exactly $0 in new business.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought around February of 2009, we had everybody lined up, 17 people. And we had, these are the 12 to 14 we can keep, and these are the ones who get laid off. We had that. We were going to meet after lunch, and I went to lunch with one of my mentors, and I didn't tell him what we were planning to do. He just said, this is what our companies are going to do. They're going to cut costs. They're going to be bare bones about their business. And then when the business comes back, they're going to have to hire people back. They won't have access to the same people they let go. Then they're going to have to spend all this time training
Mm-hmm.
and getting trust back with their clients and all of these different things. He says, there's a different way. You just cut costs with the current staff. And maybe some people don't take a paycheck for a while, or maybe benefits are trimmed, or maybe hours are trimmed. So I went back to my partners after that. We had this meeting in the afternoon where we were going to announce the cuts. And I said, hey, guys, what do you think about really trying to trim costs? And a couple things that had happened is prior to that meeting, people came into our office. 2 or 3 people came into our offices and said, we're not busy enough. You can cut our hours. Or one person said, you don't have to pay me for a while. And we were just like, wow, really? People will do that? And so we were so happy when that meeting rolled around. We had a plan in place where we could keep everybody. And the amount of loyalty and relief, because it was chaos, it was mayhem. So many people were losing their jobs. And I think at the time, unemployment went up to about 10% nationally, maybe even a little bit higher, but around 10%, which is, I think we're at about 4% right now. And people are complaining that maybe unemployment is too high or that the economy is not robust. Regardless, not everybody understands how dire it was. And so many people were relieved. And we got through that period of time, and we were able to keep everybody and restore people's hours and pay the people back who had taken cuts. It was a remarkable time. So I am so proud of being able to do that. And it's not necessarily an accomplishment that I or my partners did. It's an accomplishment that the organization did. And people within the organization had those ideas and came to us. And there was trust built around the organization to enable that.
And that makes me wonder, if you have people coming into your office telling you they'll take reduced hours, won't take a paycheck. I mean, you have to have a healthy work environment, it seems like, or a product or a company that they believe in. They're not showing up to get paid. They're showing up, obviously they want to get paid. They need to get paid, but they're showing up also to contribute to something that's bigger than themselves, something that they think is worth contributing all this time and effort into. How did you go about creating a work environment like that?
Well, one of the things that we did was we measured employee engagement for other companies. So we really understood what was required for people to be engaged, to be loyal to the organization, and we tried to apply those tenets. We had to create trust. We paid fairly. We had decent benefits. Decent, not great. Decent. We recognized people when they did great work, to the point of we had this person on our team who would work so hard, ridiculously hard, and we created a value named after his last name. And it was the relentlessness to get the job done no matter what the circumstances are. And he embodied that. And so we wanted everybody to embody that. So we understood how to motivate people, how to create trust, and also have an environment where it's called pro-social behavior. And being an athlete, you'll understand that. You can score 25 points a game, but if your team loses, what's the point? Is it better to score 12 points a game and pass the ball once in a while and get other people involved? That's pro-social behavior, putting the team first. We were able to create that environment, and I think that we did that very, very well. I also think we took risks on employees and put them in positions that they might not otherwise have gotten at other organizations. People who are artists or people who didn't finish their degrees, but we knew that there was something special about them, but they didn't have the piece of paper that said, oh, I am special. We gave people those types of opportunities. And so they already knew going in, oh, these folks took a chance on me. And I'll give you just one example because I'm close with a woman who is the mother-in-law of somebody who worked for us.
Okay.
And she said, boy, you really changed his career. He couldn't get hired at other organizations, and now he has no difficulty finding a job elsewhere. And he's worked in a number of different sales jobs at great companies. And so I think for all of those reasons, we were able to create that environment.
Yeah, I can't speak to necessarily being a part of a business, but certainly being a part of a team. I've been part of, thankfully, more successful teams than unsuccessful teams, but the ones that were extremely successful, everyone felt like they were contributing something, whether they were a manager or the star player, the two-way starter, you name it. They were contributing something to the team, and it's that team environment that really can separate the good from the great. I just love that concept of what separates the good from the great. And having that in mind really seems to be what separates the good from the greats. Yeah.
Mark Messier, who played for the Edmonton Oilers and the New York Rangers, I think he had a career of about 25 years in the National Hockey League. He wrote a book called No One Wins Alone. and Wayne Gretzky was his teammate. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. He's writing this book, No One Wins Alone. Wayne Gretzky got a lot of accolades for being the star on those Edmonton Oilers teams. He was, he's the points leader, all-time points leader in the NHL, and he has the most goals ever and the most assists ever. He was by far the star of the league. And I thought, this is a shot at him because they were teammates. And it wasn't. It wasn't at all. In fact, Mark Messier spoke so highly of Wayne Gretzky and talked about him being his best friend. And it was really how winning teams are created. And they said at Edmonton, everybody was respected. The person who was selling the tickets, the person who was the trainer, the person who would clean up after we got out of the locker room. And in fact, some veterans from other teams came to play for the Oilers, and they didn't treat some of the people with respect. And Messier and Gretzky would say, no, this is how we treat people. That person is an important person on the team. And so everybody has a role to play on a winning team. And when somebody feels that they're above a job, they may not be the right person to be on that team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that example reminds me of another example I've heard of. Everyone's familiar with the JFK moon speech. We choose to go to the moon in this decade. Do the other things not because it's easy, but because it is hard. And I heard the story of him visiting Cape Canaveral, and he talks to one of the janitors, and he says, "Sir, what's your role here?" And he said, "Putting a man on the moon." Not that he cleans the floors or empties the trash, but he's putting a man on the moon. You get that in a company or on a team, you're going to do great things. I mean, that's just like a micro example of a very important tactic that companies or teams can implement there. I just want to rewind a little bit here, and you talked about the $3,000 you guys put in. What did you find was the hardest thing when starting the company, Modern Survey, or just being an entrepreneur in other companies? What's the hardest thing in getting it off the ground?
I think it's going to depend on who you're talking to, but for us, it was getting people's attention.
Yeah.
We were unknowns. We were young, and we didn't have relationships. And so getting people's attention, and I think it's much, much harder now. There's a woman, Dr. Gloria Mark, who's been studying attention, and attention has fallen at work from we're able to focus on a task at work. It's fallen from about 2 minutes and 12 seconds to about 47 seconds. So we're changing our direction every 47 seconds. People's attention is very, very limited, and we had a very difficult time because we didn't have this track record and credibility of getting in front of the people who could buy our services. So that was probably the most difficult thing. The other difficult thing at the time was, how do you get people to change what they had been doing, which is paper surveys? Mm-hmm. We used to mail surveys out all around the world to people and have them fill it out. Then they would send the surveys back in a self-addressed stamped envelope, and then it would be tabulated. And, it seems so archaic today. Mm-hmm. The idea of doing it online was such a huge change for organizations, and they were very, very risk averse. And so we had to get over those two things.
Yeah, and I agree. It depends with the company, the business person, you name it. But yeah, that's getting attention certainly for a small company or a new company I think that's almost universal for a lot of people too. So we talked a good amount about Modern Survey, but I also want to talk about you being a mentor. You talked about how your mentor was vital in that decision during the 2008 financial crisis and not having to cut people, and ways you can do things differently compared to other people. So you've been a mentor for young people for over 30 years, and what has being a mentor taught you?
Well, before I get into what it's been like to be a mentor, I would like to talk about what it's like to have mentors. Mm-hmm. And my approach to mentors, I've never had a formal mentor, mm-hmm. somebody who said, said, I'll be your mentor, or where I've been assigned to learn from somebody. And I've taken kind of a collage or a mosaic approach to mentorship, meaning I see something that I like about somebody and I say, I'm going to watch that person do that, whether it's speaking or whether it's relating to other people or maybe writing, I'm just going to observe that person. And I may know them or I may not know them. So my friend Doug is a mentor of mine. We've known each other for over 20 years. Bob, the person I referred to earlier, he's in his 80s. I think he's 84. He's been an informal mentor of mine. We play cards, or we used to play cards once a month. We haven't played since the pandemic, but I was able to spend time around him and learn from him. And then there are people I've never met before who I've just observed, some of them online, and I like this part of them. As I said before, nobody's perfect, and I don't think you have to emulate everything about somebody for them to be a mentor, for them to be somebody you learn from. And a most recent mentor of mine is a guy by the name of Coach George Raveling. He's 87 years old now, and he's a Hall of Fame basketball coach and has done amazing things. And we've only met 2 times. And I've learned a great deal, particularly around learning and reinvention. When I first met him, I asked, "What are you reading?" And I think he was 82 or 83 years old. And he said, "Future You" by Brian David Johnson. And I'm thinking to myself, man, this guy's in his 80s. And he's thinking about, who do I want to be in the future? I need to be close to this guy. And he's a man who literally plans out every minute of his day. And he will not waste a minute. And I'm like, wow, this is something. Because I waste time all the time. And I feel a little guilty about it. Oh, I can learn a lot from this guy. And we don't talk very often. We text and email every now and again. And I'm just constantly observing him and learning from him, and very interested in how he's spending his time and what he finds fascinating. So if you don't have a mentor, if you're listening out there, if you don't have a mentor, find one. And it doesn't have to be a formal relationship, but you can learn so much by observing and even reading biographies of people and behaviors of great people. It doesn't have to be something that it doesn't have to be a perfect person. And so that's it. I've benefited greatly from having mentors. And I will even say in a great thing that mentors do is they may have a greater belief in you than you have in you. That's one of the things that I've learned from a great college mentor of mine who was a professor. The other thing is, mentors often will teach you by putting you in different situations. And so I can remember going to fancy restaurants. I never had an opportunity to go to a fancy restaurant. And a mentor would take me to a fancy restaurant and he would say, "This is how you open the menu. This is when you're ready to order. This is what you do with the menu. This is what you do with the silverware." It seems like very, very simple things, but I had never been taught these things. And I was like, he never made me feel inferior because I didn't know what I was doing. He just knew this guy needs a little bit of help. He's got potential, and I'm going to show him the way. I'm not even going to tell him that I'm teaching him. He's just going to learn it. And so that's what mentors can do. And I've been mentoring now for 33 years. And the first person I mentored was somebody named Teddy. And he was at Hennepin County Juvenile Detention Center. He had done a very violent crime. I don't know exactly what it was. I think I know what it was. He kind of alluded to it one time. And he was 17 and sentenced as an adult. So he was going to go to a maximum security penitentiary. And I just remember with Teddy, like, he was this tough kid. He was in gangs and he was really, really proud to be in gangs. And he would teach me things. So I would teach him things. I would say, "What do you want to learn next week?" And he would say, "Oh, talk about a topic." And I'd spend all week or spend the week researching that topic. And then I would go in and talk about that. But at the end of almost every time we met, he would try to teach me something. And what was interesting is he would teach me how to break into cars, and he would teach me like how to, one time he taught me how to hide a razor blade.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, these are not things that are going to be applicable. But what I got out of it is, oh, wow, he really valued our time together. He learned from me, and he wants to teach me. And he took great pride in trying to teach me. And so we spent probably 6 or 7 months together, and then he got sentenced. He turned 18, and then he went to an adult facility. Mm-hmm. And we stayed in touch. We weren't supposed to, but I wrote him on occasion. He wrote me. His mom wrote me. And when he got out, like after 8 years, I went to visit him. Mm-hmm. And that was, really remarkable. It was a remarkable experience for me because it was in Kansas City. It was in a very, very segregated part of Kansas City where, I got out of the car and literally people just stopped and looked at me like, what are you doing here? Mm-hmm. And I knocked on his door, and he was kind of a big guy when he went away, but he was a Hulk when I saw him again. He was probably 26, 27 years old at that time. And he just grabbed me and he hugged me like I was his brother or something. It was really remarkable. And then he brought me inside. He introduced me to his mother, and we spent the day together. It was really quite special. And what I learned from that experience is that, number one, I can talk with anybody, and almost everybody has the potential to learn and to grow, but he just didn't have the opportunity. Mm-hmm. His future was pretty much determined for him because everybody he knew, every male he knew, went to prison or was involved in the gangs or died, and so with that in mind, I've spent the last 30 years trying to provide opportunities for young people. And so that's what I've tried to do with mentorship is try to minimize the number of Teddies that are out there who have got their future predetermined for them.
Yeah, that reminds me of the most recent conversation I've had with Mike McGrath, who's works in the juvenile probation officer, and he talks about how you go in and people have committed these terrible crimes, so they've done terrible things, but there's still that little bit of good in them that you can try to retrieve, and that seems like kind of your way of going about that is through mentorships and trying to shine the light on that little bit of good that they got that maybe they don't even know they have themselves because they've just been brought up in an environment where that's just been put down and not been rewarded, and you try to show them that little bit of good and how you can use that for their own good.
There was love in our relationship, and I know this. There was an incident one time. I would typically go and visit Teddy after dinner, but occasionally I would have dinner with them. And these were 15 to 17-year-old kids typically. And that part of the detention center was called ADSEG, which is advanced segregation. These were the more violent offenders. And I would go in there, and there would be typically no issue with me being there. People might wonder who I was or why I was there, but nobody would confront me. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment where I had gotten my food, I'd gone through the line to get my food, and I sat down, and there was a kid who was sitting down at the table, and he was a big kid. He must have been 240 pounds. He was a huge, huge kid. Mm-hmm. And he was talking, and Teddy was in line, and he was always hyper alert. I think that's just a product of where he grew up and being involved in the gangs. He was always looking around and surveilling. And this kid starts talking about me to the other kids at the table. And he's saying, "Who's this guy?" And he's acting a little bit aggressively. And I'm just listening and watching. And Teddy just leaves the line, leaves his cart behind, and he gets in that kid's face. Now, this kid must have outweighed Teddy by 60 or 70 pounds. He gets in this kid's face, and he says, "That's my tutor. And you never mess with my tutor. Because you mess with my tutor, you're messing with me." And that kid, I swear, he just deflated. He went from this hulking 240-pound kid to 150 pounds, 160 pounds. And like, Teddy was the alpha dog, and he was letting everybody know, you don't mess with me. And it was that moment where I knew, oh, this guy loves me. Mm-hmm. And maybe he had never had a male in his life who cared about him in the way, or showed up, or was reliable. But it was that moment that I was like, wow, this is teaching me a lesson. This is not this didn't have to be a throwaway. This didn't have to be the way his life, the path that he was on. He didn't have to go down this path.
Yeah. And that had been profound, too, to be in that environment, and you don't really know what's going to happen. That guy could have gotten mad. He could have attacked him. Really anything could have happened in that situation. But, yeah, you mess with him, you mess with me. That's that's pretty cool to know someone has your back like that, too, in life. I mean, he probably never – well, that's probably why he gravitated towards the gang, I would assume, because he probably had that feeling that,
There's a lot of love in gangs.
Yeah.
There's a brotherhood. And there's a purpose behind it, and you may or may not agree with it. But when people don't know the difference between right and wrong, they may gravitate. That it might be a magnetic force for them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope, Teddy, if you're listening to this, I hope you're doing well, because that's a great story right there. So you host your own podcast yourself called 12 Geniuses. Why did you start 12 Geniuses, and how did you come up with the name?
After we sold our company, I worked for the company that bought us for 2 years, and it was really evident. First of all, working with the team at the company that bought us, among some of the smartest people, explorers, people who are working globally with these huge companies, I learned so much. And it was evident to me that the world had changed while I was really focused on building our company. And I decided that, okay, I want to spend the next however long exploring how our world has changed. Mm-hmm. So think about 1999 is when we started the company. 2016 is when we sold it. And I learned so much between the time we sold and the time I left Aon. And I realized, well, there's social change and there's technology change. And among the social changes would be, things like immigration and addiction and aging. So I started to explore all of these different social trends and the technology trends like AI and virtual reality and 3D printing, and learning more about biotechnology advancements and CRISPR and different things like that. And so that's why I started 12 Geniuses, is just to explore how our world has changed, and to get a better sense of where we're going as a species, as humanity. And I had worked very, very hard for a long time, and we were expecting our second child in June of 2018, which is around the time I started the company and the podcast. And I realized I didn't want to work that hard anymore. So I thought, I'll just do one interview a month. And that's where the 12 came in. And the geniuses are the people I interview.
Gotcha.
So there's 12 of them per season. And these are remarkable human beings who have achieved great things, have great ideas. Maybe they're scientists, maybe they're military leaders, wide variety of topics that we explore. So that's why I wanted to just explore with them.
That makes sense, because I was always curious on what the name symbolized, and now that you say that, that makes perfect sense. Did you have a specific interview style before creating 12 Geniuses, or did you kind of rely on your natural ability to talk to anyone, or is it something you learned in college? Like, how did you go about interviewing people? Or has it changed since you've started?
It has changed. I was way more prepared. I had an idea of where I wanted things to go. I did a ton of research prior to interviewing guests, and now I kind of know more how to conduct an interview and what I want to ask. And there are questions that come up over and over again, not all the same ones. So I only have to recreate 40% of the questions maybe, and 60% are ones that I've asked in the past. I used to travel all around the world and interview in person. And when the pandemic hit, the show wouldn't have gone on without virtual interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I started to do virtual interviews. I prefer to do face-to-face, but that's not always possible. Plus, I'm able to do around 40 interviews a year. And previously, it would have just been one a month.
Mm-hmm.
To go and I've been to Montreal, I've been to Los Angeles numerous times, DC, London, Germany, all around. And now, so that's when I was doing it in person. And now I get guests from Australia. I've done interviews in Pakistan. I've done interviews in every corner of the world. So that's where the online enables it. And then I've experimented with some shorter interviews, 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on, who I'm able to talk to and what the topic is.
Do you have an ideal time frame that you think is like the best for interviews, or does it really depend on the subject, the topic, who you're interviewing?
I don't know if there's an ideal time.
No.
Typically, mine are 38 to 42 minutes.
Because I see some people, I think John Meacham has a podcast where he does 2 minutes every day about something that's happened in history, and then I've seen former Navy SEAL Jocko Willink, who's done like 7-hour interviews before it, and it's like your whole day basically is just doing that. And it's like, that's incredible that people can find something great in that short of time, and someone's able to talk for that long of a time too. I mean, Jocko Willink will literally sit there and he'll just read through basically an entire book and just provide his opinions as he's reading through it. I mean, it's great to see how much this the field of podcasting has grown so much. And I'm curious, since you're involved in that field, why do you think people have gravitated towards podcasts as much as they have?
It's convenient.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can go and learn, and you can learn on the fly. And there's so many different interesting topics out there. So I think those are a couple of reasons. Plus, it's very inexpensive to do.
Yes.
And I don't know how many podcasts there are, but 1 million or more,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. So, I think it appeals to people who have a learning mindset, who really are interested in learning and not satisfied in knowing
Mm-hmm.
what they already know or want to confirm what they already know. And so, it's just appealing for a number of reasons.
Has there been a specific field or specific, I don't know, just I guess field that you've it's really been exciting to learn about while being the host? I know you do a lot about talking about the future. That seems to be something that you spend a lot of your time on. What about the future have you been excited about, or you look forward to, or something you've learned about the future?
I'm fascinated by what's possible, what the potential for humanity is, and I'm generally optimistic about it. And so with that in mind, when I started this project, I created this, I put it on my desk and I said, here are things that are definitely going to happen. And on that list would be like death and taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And here are things that'll never happen.
Mm-hmm.
And on that list were humans on Mars in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, the more I've explored the future and talked to these amazing people, how the things on the list have shifted.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't believe that death is something that has to happen.
Really?
Right. I don't necessarily believe in immortality.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Yuval Noah Harari has introduced me to a term through his book, not through an interview. But he introduced this term called amortality,
Mm-hmm.
which is you're going to live for as long as you want to live until like something, the sun burns out or,
Yep.
or
Yep.
something befalls you, you get obliterated by a bus, something like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I truly believe that we will cure aging. So there are people who are exploring aging as a disease. Dr. David Sinclair is one. I've had a guest by the name of Sergey Young on my show. I've talked with Dr. Stephen Ousted from the University of Alabama, Birmingham. We've talked about aging and talked about the progress that is being made and there's the potential of treating aging like a disease, and where you would take a pill to either stay the age that you are or even potentially reverse aging, which is a mind-blowing thought, right?
Yeah.
I'm 56. I was born in 1968, but what if I could live like a 25-year-old or 28-year-old? Through replacing joints and turning the age of my cells, reversing the age of my cells. Like, that's a possibility. I see that as a possibility. Now, is it going to happen in my lifetime? I don't know. Could it? Absolutely. And I even tell people, if I can make it to 70, 120 is a layup. It's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And people are like, oh, no, I saw this stat one time. 57% of Americans, according to Pew Research, said they would not want to live to 120. And I'm thinking to myself, it's because they have poor imaginations. They think that 120 is what 120 will be like what 120 is right now, which is decrepit, which is you have no teeth, you can't move around, you don't have any friends left. Well, what if 120 you're still vibrant, you're still able to, you haven't lost any of your mind or your neurological capabilities? What if you're able to hang out with your friends or make new friends or do things that 120 doesn't allow right now? That's what I think 120 will look like for me, which is, over 60 years.
Yeah, that's fascinating concept I'm hearing this for the first time, really, that idea. I know you've talked about it before in your podcast, but to get a little more in detail, people think, I always thought the goal for me is to make it to 2100, get out of this century to the next one. I'd be 96 then, roughly, if that was the case. I think that's a good goal. But to go further than that, you just look at what the beginning of the 20th century was like in the world, and then what the end of the 20th century was like, and the change we had. I saw some stat where it's like the fastest a human had ever gone for like 3,000 years was the fastest horse in the world, and then you had the train that came in, and then you had the airplane, and then from the year the airplane was created to 1969, we landed on the moon, and it's this exponential growth with these things. So yeah, if you keep that progress going with aging or AI, other things, renewable energy, limitless opportunities.
You'll make it to 96 if we freeze technology right now.
Yeah.
You live a healthy life. You're going to work a safe job. Think about all of the very, very difficult jobs that have been done throughout human history. Building buildings, wars, many of those things have been eliminated. You get to live in a clean environment, breathe clean air, drink clean water. If we froze technology right now, you're making it to 96. No question. I read a biography to the girls of Helen Keller.
Yep.
And at the back of this book, there's a timeline of her life. The year before she was born, the light bulb was invented. The year after she died, Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. That's the progress that was made in one human lifetime when change was slow. And we're moving not at warp speed, but we're moving really Mach speed. Yeah. Certainly. We're moving at Mach speed right now. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew for the first time. In 1919, I think the first Wright brothers flight lasted 12 seconds. In 1919, it was the first transatlantic flight. In 1927 was Lindbergh flying to Paris from New York. And in 2019, 36 million passenger seats flew transcontinentally.
Gosh.
That's how much progress we've made in 120 years.
Fascinating. That's what I'm saying. Like, people think about the future, and you got climate change, you got all these other issues, divisiveness, both socially, politically, you name it. But it's hard not to be an optimist when it comes to the future. When you see how much growth we've had as a species, like you said, just in the 20th century alone, and just in terms of transportation. This morning, I was looking through Washington Post, and I saw SpaceX was able to successfully not only bring a rocket back to Earth from space, they were able to catch it before it hit the ground to the enormous scaffolding that they have where they load the astronauts into. I'm like, not only did they land the rocket, it didn't even touch the ground. It could just go right back up and reload people. I mean, that is just so unbelievable to me.
There's a quote that you may have heard this before. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke wrote that. And we are living in a magical time. I can think about the first time I saw something that was magic to me. It was the microwave. Prior to that, it was probably the mid-'70s or late 70s. Prior to that, if you wanted to heat a cup of water, you had to put it on the stove. Yep. And then somebody explains to me that there are waves that are running through this thing that are making the water hot. That was magic to me. And everywhere we are turning, there's magic. Artificial intelligence, magic. CRISPR, magic. Quantum, if we get there. Fusion, if we get there. Those are the magics of tomorrow. Now, my daughters, artificial intelligence will not be magic to them.
No.
It's just going to be, just as the smartphone may not be magic to you. The smartphone is magic. That's magic in your pocket.
Yeah.
You know, you grow up in 1970s on the Iron Range and putting what one of my guests calls the compendium of human knowledge in your pocket. That's magic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating to think. And just not only in terms of like the smartphone itself, where it's a phone in your pocket, it's a music player, like you said, all that human knowledge in one spot like that. And that's just, I mean, the phone has been around for, I don't know when it was invented, late 1800s, but the transformation that's seen too, just like with air travel as well. It's just phenomenal, the progress we are making as a species. But you mentioned AI, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that. Me being at college right now, it's a pretty that's an issue that's talked about a lot for academic integrity and all of that, and how people are worried that jobs are going to be taken away in the future too. So you're an optimist, so I have an idea of how you're going to answer this, but do you view it more as a threat or as a tool? And if it's a threat, or what are the reasons people think it's a threat, but why do you think it's a tool if that's the case?
It's both. You know, certainly it's both. When I watched the movie Oppenheimer this summer, I guess it was, they were talking about the atom bomb and nuclear weapons, but I wasn't watching it with that in mind. I was watching it with artificial intelligence in mind. I don't know if you viewed that as, what the movie was about, but it's this existential threat. Existential, exist, means it can wipe out humanity. And to me, I'm very proud of humanity for not obliterating itself.
Right.
But I also don't rest comfortably knowing that we've only done it for 80 years.
Yeah.
80 years is not a long time. When I think about the future, I think about thousands of years. There's a guy by the name of Will MacAskill. He's a philosopher at Cambridge, and he wrote What We Owe the Future, one of the most important books that I've ever read. And he said the typical mammalian species can last 1 million years. And we've been around, 40,000? It means we have the potential of 950 or 960,000 more years if we make good choices. And that's very humbling. I lived most of my life with myself in mind. And then you have children and your worldview changes. You start to think about other people, what your children might inherit. But I'm thinking about humanity and, many, many generations, hundreds of generations, even thousands of generations. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible.
Yeah.
And does it have to stay on this earth? Yeah, for a long time, it's going to have to. Will we colonize other planets? Most certainly, most definitely. But to get back to your question, is AI a threat or is it an incredible tool? It's both. The thing that is different from me when it comes to AI and when it comes to the atom bomb or nuclear weapons is that AI is democratized.
Mm-hmm.
So there's only a handful of people who have the ability to launch a weapon,
Mm-hmm.
a nuclear weapon, right? And there's protocols in place to make sure that somebody doesn't do it in the middle of the night by rolling over. We don't have that with AI.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can, in the wrong hands, AI can be quite devastating. But in general, I believe in humanity. I believe that we will make good choices. And I also believe that good generally outmaneuvers evil.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to be a very, very positive thing. A lot of people I've been talking to have compared it to electricity. You can't imagine the world without electricity. Well, you can't imagine living in a world without electricity. You can kind of imagine what it might be like.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to live there. And it's going to be that fundamental to our species and our future. Just think of gaining 5 hours of time because you have a light bulb.
Yeah.
That's what
Mm-hmm.
electricity did. And a guy by the name of Kevin Kelly has been a guest on the show. He's an incredible futurist. He started Wired Magazine. He's one of the co-founders of Wired Magazine. And he said, prior to the steam engine, prior to electricity, anything that was going to be done required human or animal muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're in the age of intelligence being outsourced to machines. And so, you had to think in the past, and now the thinking is going to be done for you. Not the routine thinking, not necessarily the novel thinking or the creative thinking going forward. So it's a very, very exciting time to be alive.
When I talk about examples of AI, how it can be used, for me, I was taught in high school how to handwrite citations for papers, MLA, APA, all that, and I love my English teacher, but I absolutely hated doing that so much. And now you go on ChatGPT, take this URL, you say put this in MLA format, boom, instantly it's created for you. And if you got 15 of those, you save yourself 2 hours, 3 hours right there by not having to go through and do it yourself. And that's just, again, another small example, but there's probably unlimited examples when it comes to what AI can help simplify for us. Yeah, talking about the internet or just electricity, that's just kind of how it's probably going to transform if it stays in the right hands. And I've always heard people talking about like the threats that it's going to go like off on its own sort of deal. I can't really wrap my head around it right now. I got to do more research with that. Can you speak to that at all anyway, or you don't find that as a reliable threat?
It's possible. I understand it. I probably can't articulate it.
Yeah.
I think Nick Bostrom created this paperclip dilemma or something like that, where the idea is if you give AI a goal, it's going to work relentlessly to fulfilling that goal. And in the case of the paperclip dilemma, if you say AI, your job is to create paperclips, it's going to create paperclips. And it could be so powerful that every resource it sees, it will create a paperclip out of it. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a ridiculous example, but that's kind of the idea is AI is very goal-oriented, and we have to be very thoughtful with the goals that we give it because, kind of like King Midas, he wanted everything he touched to turn to gold. Yep. Well, okay. What about my daughter? I want to touch her. She's going to turn into gold? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have to be thoughtful about the goals that we give AI, and that's why a lot of people want to regulate this very, very powerful tool. But to your point, we're going to live longer, and already we have machines that are going to do a lot of work for us and have done a lot of work for us that we had to do in the past. Now we're going to have AI to do a lot of the routine tasks that we used to do. So that should free up a lot of times for us to self-actualize and to work on passion projects and to create a lot of abundance, which I feel we are on the precipice of global abundance. So I am very optimistic. We are humans, and we have to make great choices. And we have to mitigate those people who are not going to make great choices or choices that could really be detrimental to humanity.
Yeah. It's like with the nuclear bomb. If it gets put in the wrong hands, a lot of harm can come out of that too. So just regulation in some form or another, but that's another topic for discussion in and of itself. People also mention the idea of jobs being taken. Do you think that's a well-founded concern, or do you think that's more just a temporary thing that people are worried about right now? Because, you look in history, like there used to be street lights or street lamps that you had to light with, with fire as like a candle or a wick was in there. And then you had electricity. Well, all those jobs disappeared, but they would go on to create, find new jobs too. So that's kind of like the natural progression of things in human history. So do you think that's a well-founded fear with AI, or is it just part of the process?
Both. I do think that it's a well-founded fear for people who are unwilling to change. And being agile is a very, very important trait or skill or characteristic to pick up. Where it becomes difficult is when you're in your 50s and 60s and never did anything else. It becomes very, very difficult to change. So I think that there are going to be some casualties as a result of AI because of people being unwilling to change or retrain or unlearn, however you want to call it. And it's going to also create new jobs. And I've had a couple of guests explain two different ways of viewing or companies' views on AI. One is to use AI to replace people. So that's one mindset. They call that the race to the bottom. Yeah. So cut head count because we have this new tool that will do what these individuals did. And the other is to enhance and remove friction from many people's jobs. So maybe 80% of what somebody did was very task-oriented, was repeatable. Hey, we can augment this person, and now 20% of what they did, they can do 100% of the time, and we can get 5 times or even more value out of that person. So that's kind of the mindset. And, almost universally with people I talk to, the latter is going to be the business model that eventually wins. So you can cut costs. That'll help you in the short term. Long term, you want to enhance people. Make sure you get the right people in the jobs, but then enhance them with AI.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. It can be scary to those who aren't willing to change. I haven't heard someone articulate in that way, but that's a great way to look at it, in my opinion. So yeah, it's exciting to see how far we've come already in the last 5 years and see what the next 5 years has in store for us when it comes to AI. I want to shift now towards the your most recent season on 12 Geniuses dealing with democracy. We're less than a month away from the election now. You had a conversation with Vance Cryer, and he discusses the threats to American democracy. And based on that conversation, what is our democracy's biggest threat internationally and domestically?
The threats internationally, and I've spoken with a number of members of the military, and I think they would echo the same things, would be Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and then terrorism. I think those are kind of the big 5 that most people believe. And then there's internal. Some people think that there are internal, whether it's the far right or the far left, these are the threats to democracy. And having that conversation with Vance really illuminated something to me, which is these internal threats are not threats, but they are the tools that our external adversaries are using to do their bidding. So through social media, through even cable news, our external adversaries are able to fire up their base and have people believe that their enemy is their political opposition.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, wow, that's really, really important for us to keep in mind, is that my political adversary is not the threat to democracy, but believing that they're the threat to democracy, I'm doing the bidding of China or Russia, North Korea, wherever. And as Vance said, and others have said, is nobody wants to take us on in a traditional military conflict because we're superior. The American military is very, very impressive.
Yeah.
You know, in space, in the air, on land, in the sea. Nobody wants to mess with that.
Mm-hmm.
But can they create apathy using these very, very inexpensive tools? Can they get us to view the other side, whether you're Democrat, it's the Republicans, or Republicans, it's the Democrats, far left, it's the far right, whatever. Can they get us at each other's throats? Yeah, they can, and they're doing it. They're doing a really effective job, and it's so cheap for them, and they don't have to lose any lives.
Yep.
It's remarkable. Or sow doubt in our election process or electoral process. Yeah, they're doing it. So that was something that really stood out to me in that interview with Vance, and I love talking with him. He's you know, a wonderful human being and very clear and articulate. But you know, understanding that I don't want to be a tool.
No.
And when I recognized that, I was like, okay, this really shifts things. And now I have a different responsibility. I have more of a responsibility to connect with people who might have different views than I do. Not try to change their mind, but to show my humanity and to treat them with respect. And we all have that job to do. So let's reframe this and not view them as the adversary, but view them as an ally to thwarting these external adversaries.
Absolutely. I mean, just this whole topic right here just reminds me of Lincoln's quote, "House divided cannot stand." You know, they can't beat us traditionally, so they're going to have to beat us in unconventional ways, sowing division within America. And I would agree, it's a cheap and effective way that they're doing it by having they sowed doubt in our electoral system this last year or this last cycle. That was a big thing. The media too. The people can't trust the information they're getting. At least some people feel they can't. I mean, that's a cornerstone to society, is be informed. If you got to make informed decisions in a democracy, I mean, you got to know where you're getting your information from and if it's true or not. So that's, again, another thing that they were effective at. But I agree with you on it's difficult. It certainly is easier said than done for a lot of people that have just been programmed to think the other side is adversarial, especially if you're in a information silos where your opinions get reinforced, and that's a whole other thing, AI and algorithms and all that with social media. But to go outside your comfort zone and listen to people that have different opinions. I always talk about how I grew up in a very conservative area in a small town, and now I live in Minneapolis, a big city that's a lot more liberal. And it's interesting to see people are very different, but also very similar at the same time, too. And that we have a lot more in common than you think. And that goes to going to the Soviet Union or Rick Steves going to Iran. A lot of people value, similar things. They just don't see it, necessarily until you go and have face-to-face conversations with them. So
where we're sitting is in the headquarters of Think to Perform.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a company that's run by a friend of mine, and they have done a study. I think 200,000 or more people have contributed to this global values study. So what are your top 5 values? And what they have found is the top 5 values, no matter if you're left or you're right, no matter where you are in the world, typically people are putting their family first, health, happiness, integrity, these types of things. So our values are very similar. I don't care if you're Palestinian and Israeli. Your values are going to be very similar. Now that we know and we have established common ground, how do you demonstrate that this value is important to you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's start a conversation around that. You value family, I value family, or you value health, I value health. What do you do in order to stay healthy? Now we have common ground. And the way that you may, work out or whatever, maybe protecting my family is limiting what my children read. Okay, now I understand why you might want to ban books.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I'm a little bit more empathetic. I don't agree with it, and I'm not going to change your mind. I know that. But now I see you as a human. I think that's very, very powerful if we can have conversations around, as a starting point, what do you value and how do you demonstrate that? It's a great way of building empathy.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what you're saying. People really open up to you if you know what they're interested in, what they care about. And it's crazy how many inroads you can make with someone you thought you never had anything in common with them if you just start talking to them. And that's the one thing I've really appreciated going to the University of Minnesota is coming from Albany, where it was 98% white and very similar backgrounds everyone shared. You go down to the U of M, and I see there's so many, Muslim women that walk around in their hijabs. They got their religious attire. You got so many students from Asia that are just genius. Like, everyone is just so, for the most part, very intelligent there. And it's just so great to see all these people coming together in so many different backgrounds, going to university, trying to better themselves as humans and trying to probably go back and start families or, improve the values that they already hold dear to themselves. So it's inspiring to see all those. It's a melting pot, basically, and it's very inspiring to see. Do you think this election cycle ranks among the most historic in our nation's history? I think of some examples like 1968, maybe 2008, to name a few. I don't know. You have the history background. Would you think it's appropriate to throw it up there, or is it too early to say?
Every election is important. I don't think we'll know until 40 years have passed to determine how significant it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Certainly with Biden stepping down, that's something that's hasn't happened since LBJ, if I'm not mistaken. So it's interesting to see how that'll play out. But that's very true, though. We won't know.
It's an interesting election in that there have been multiple assassination attempts on President Trump. And there has been so much that has happened in between. Like, that's not even a story right now. Mm-hmm. It's such a strange election. Like you said, a president choosing not to run for re-election. Yes, LBJ chose not to run in 1968, but with much, much more time, right? I can't remember when he chose to step down or when he chose not to run. March, maybe?
Late March
of 68.
Like that,
And then Bobby Kennedy started to run I can't remember when Biden chose not to. June?
Yeah, late June, something like that.
So, one of the issues is that the Democrats anointed Kamala Harris as the candidate. So the people didn't get to vote, which, may or may not be problematic. But that was what was, to me, is so different than 1968 is just the amount of time or the compressed timeline for getting a new candidate in.
Yeah, and think of what's happening domestically, internationally, too. We've had some natural disasters that have just wrecked the southeast part of our nation. What's going on in the Middle East right now. But you also have some good news, too, with inflation. The interest rates have been cut. That's a huge thing for some people. Job market seems healthy for the most part. Stock market's been performing at historically high levels. So it's a lot of differing factors coming together. And I think it's going to be close, but you never know what's going to happen until the day it comes. But I think we all can just hope that it remains peaceful. I know that's what I'm hoping for.
And I would also add that democracy is the best form of government in the world. The United States, with its flaws, is a great place to live. There are people who want to live here who don't live here. We have a lot going for us. And I'm optimistic. The last episode that I did in this season, which will come out on October 22nd, is called American Democracy's Next 250 Years. I truly believe that if we're thoughtful like the founding fathers were when they created this country, if we're thoughtful, we have a long runway for this country. Democracy is messy. It is. It's slow. No doubt about it, but it gets people involved. And that's the beautiful thing about it, is you can be involved if you want to be. And it enables people to flourish, and it enables people to be themselves. That's a beautiful thing. You talked about the fall of the wall, and I think that the 1990s are one of the most disruptive decades in human history, mainly because hundreds of millions of people for the first time got to experience freedom. They got to be who they want to be. And we have made incredible progress in human rights. Would you like to be African American in the 1960s or 2024? 2024, every single day. No question about it. About a woman. 2024. And then it should be better in 2026 and 2028. So for any marginalized group, America's a great place to be. It has its flaws, and it will continue to get better. So I'm very, very bullish, very, very optimistic.
Yeah, as am I. I always use the term anti-fragile when it comes to the Constitution, in the sense that you throw something at it to try to damage it, becomes more hardened, more secure. Civil War, civil rights, World War II, Cold War. Even January 6th, our Constitution, it bends, but it doesn't break, and it just reinforces the strength that it has too. So it's I would agree with you on the bullish sentiment when it comes to America. So now, kind of transitioning to this last topic I have here in the future, and you mentioned it already, but some things already. But why do you believe this is the best time to be alive in human history?
Well, let me ask the question: when would you have liked to have been born?
Exactly.
When would you have? What other time in human history, other than the future, would you prefer to live in?
For me personally, I wouldn't change it for any time. I mean, everyone romanticizes like the Renaissance or Athens, but then you have pharmaceutical drugs or no human rights or anything like that. So yeah, for me personally, I wouldn't change anything that I've had the fortune to experience.
Even being a king 200, 300 years ago, I'm living better than a king from 300 years ago. And I will just say there are a few books that have changed my life. I mentioned Will MacAskill's book, What We Owe the Future. Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. No.
Okay.
The name sounds familiar, though.
Well, that book changed my life. And essentially what he did was he looked at all sorts of different measurable things about the human experience, like education and the gap between boys and girls in education, childhood mortality, so how many babies die before the age of 5, workplace accidents, longevity, all of these different things that could be measured and indicate progress or where there have been declines. 35, 36 different things, all of them are trending in the right direction. Now, I think the average life expectancy around 1900 was, I think in the U.S. was around 42, and now it's late 70s. I believe that it could be 120, average life expectancy, maybe by the end of the century is 100. Outliers, I don't think 120 is going to be an outlier, probably by the end of the century. So, with these things in mind, it's by far the best time. When we have magic, we have true magic. And I do presentation, I do some speaking engagements, and I talk about 12 trends that are changing the way we live and work. And I call 3 of them faith benders. And I truly believe AI and the biotechnology that we have at our disposal right now make humans gods.
Yeah.
Gods.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you brought this back 200 years and you show what we can do. We can grow new organs from people's cells. Robots can do surgeries. We are going to eliminate so many inefficiencies using AI. And then you add in quantum. So Eric Schmidt, on a podcast I listened to one time with Tim Ferriss, Google did a quantum simulation. So they think, what quantum computing is going to be able to do. And Eric Schmidt was CEO of Google, and I think he's been an advisor there for a long time. And that simulation, they did a calculation that would have taken a regular computer 1 million years to complete. And the quantum computer, through the simulation, it took 10 seconds.
Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
Can't even comprehend.
So, and I don't mean to be offensive to people who have religious beliefs, but these tools and these technologies give humans godlike abilities. And it's a remarkable time to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not be optimistic?
Yeah, I agree. And really the only thing that could prevent us from moving forward at this direction is nuclear war, some terrible natural disaster, perhaps some all out, just like World War III in general.
Mostly humans.
Yeah.
Mostly humans, let's be honest. And I don't mean to be too Pollyannish,
mm-hmm.
because we have really made a lot of this progress at the expense of our planet. But I believe, and these are beliefs, I don't know, I believe we have created all of the technology that we need in order to solve the climate crisis. Right now, we have it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still working on others.
Yeah.
And there's another book that has been influential in my thinking. I think it's called How We Got to Now, and it looks at refrigeration,
mm-hmm.
and it looks at a number of different things. But refrigeration was not a thing. The ice box was something. People sold ice, and you'd put it in this box, and it would kind of refrigerate or keep your food cold.
Mm-hmm.
It was before electricity. And then we had refrigeration. And then the first air conditioners were, like, it wouldn't cool a household, and they were offered in the 1940s. And then in the 1970s, you have air conditioning enabling the cooling of the Houston Astrodome. So this huge
yeah.
arena,
mm-hmm.
right? And then cooling, you have the ability to cool malls.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Mall of America, which is this huge, not far from here, opened in the 1990s. And we were able to, keep that cool or regulate the temperature. All in the span of 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're able to cool. And I think about how we can take carbon out of the atmosphere. It's very, very expensive right now. We don't know what to do with that carbon once we take it out. But what about in 20 years? What about in 40 years? What about in 60 years? My gosh, we're going to scale carbon collection. And it is going to be one of the ways in which we solve the climate crisis. And there are thousands and thousands of innovations that are happening right now working on this. So that's just one example, and that excites me.
Yeah, I can clearly see it in the way you speak and just your body language, all that. It does excite you. It's an authentic excitement too. So it's contagious to me too, not to get hyped up myself.
Well, and one of the things that I have the 2 daughters, as you know, and you've met them, and I have great concern about people. Not just young people, but I have great concern about this apathy and this pessimism. And it's not worth it. And, everything is falling apart. And I would like to remind you that when I was a kid, if you were plugged in, you heard about the world's problems twice a day, when the morning news came and when the evening news aired.
Mm-hmm.
As a teenager, if you were aware, that's how often you knew about the problems. And that space was finite. So you had 30 minutes in the evening, and then you had however many pages your morning news was.
Mm-hmm.
You had to cram in all of the world's problems for that day. And so think of what that might be like to live during that time. There's flooding in Libya. There's an earthquake in India. There's hyperinflation in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
You had to stuff all of that. And many of those stories didn't make the evening news or couldn't make the morning newspaper. Now, you can't escape the world's problems. And as a result of that, I was thinking, well, how am I going to raise these kids? How the world has all of these problems, and we're being bombarded by all of these problems, and some people can't shut it off. I can shut it off. I don't get caught down that rabbit hole. And so I came to this conclusion that, okay, I need to help these kids understand what the world is like. And this is what I told them. And now it's become a mantra. The world has many problems. The world has always had problems, and the world will always have problems. Your job is to focus on trying to fix one or two. And just know good people like you are working on the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise, it's too easy to go on Instagram or any online news source or any social media platform and just see how bad things are. Twitter, seeing street fights and how much crime there is. If that's the way you want to spend your time, you can convince yourself that this is not the best time to be alive, but you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
This is by far the best time. And just focus in on solving one or two. Be a problem solver. There's lots of other problem solvers out there. Don't get caught up in being apathetic.
Yeah, that's great advice too, and it puts in perspective, the saying, if it bleeds, it reads. It's kind of just how the media industry is designed. They get more clicks, they get more money by those terrible headlines that grab your attention.
Well, this topic has come up in this most recent season of 12 Geniuses, which is conflict entrepreneurs. There are people who are incented to shape and shift our mindsets, to pit ourselves or countrymen and countrywomen against each other. These conflict entrepreneurs, they're there to stoke this division and this rhetoric. And when you know what they're doing and you know what their game plan is, it's easy to turn it off. And I'm talking about people who are saying how bad things are on social media, Fox News or MSNBC, depending on what your political leaning is.
Mm-hmm.
That's their business model. That's what these conflict entrepreneurs do. And multiple people have said that if you're behind the scenes, when you see somebody on the right and on the left in the studio when the cameras are off, they have very civil conversations. But their job is to tell you how bad things are and how evil the other party is.
Yeah. And I don't know, is that just a byproduct of capitalism, I guess? I don't really know what the solution could be to that at this moment. I'm sure there's solutions out there, but it almost has to be just
critical thinking.
Yeah.
It's critical thinking. I think that is one of the most important things that we can and should teach people. And it's not just young people, because, somebody my age, what was printed in the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever was gospel. But now there's so many news sources. And so you have to stop and think, okay, is this believable? Mm-hmm. Come on, really? Is it believable? Okay, maybe it is believable. Oh, who's the source?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a viable source? Is this person credible? Is this resource credible. It's so remarkable when you you just explore social media or YouTube or certain things, and how quickly incredible sources start to come up when you start to explore a certain topic. And if you're not prepared to play the freeze game or to reflect on what you've seen, if you're just going to believe it, boy, oh boy, your worldview can be shifted and shaped pretty quickly and very easily.
Yeah, and for people too, I don't blame them necessarily for not thinking critically too. One, maybe they haven't been trained to do it effectively or at all, but also it takes effort. It takes time to think critically. It'd be so much easier if you just were given information, you knew it was true. You can just take that for what it's worth and not have to think twice about it. I mean, everyone's got their job, their kids, their hobbies, and they don't want to have to get bogged down in this. And you see this in the election too. It's like people aren't maybe as educated about voting as they want to be, or as they should be, because it takes effort to not only know who you want to vote for for the presidency, but also for the Senate, for the House, State House, these other issues. It takes time and effort. Some people aren't as interested or as motivated to do that too. So I can understand where they're coming from, but you can't just speak down to them. You can't be condescending, like, oh, come on, you can't actually think that. You got to try to relate to them in a way, or try to show them why they should do this, why it would benefit them.
After the 2020 election, I had this realization, and this was before we knew who was going to be president. Mm-hmm. So if you remember back then, there was a period of time where it was still up in the air.
Was it the Friday or Saturday afternoon? I forget when, but it was
a few days, right?
4 days, 4 or 5 days.
And so I realized that the way that we solve our division in this country is not to demand your radical, crazy, right-wing uncle to come back and to come to the center, and not to demand your niece or your nephew who might have some far left ideas to come back to the center. It's really just to allow them to believe what they want to believe and to let them know that they're loved anyway, not to change their mind, because nobody is going to allow you to demand that they change their mind. No. That is just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, we need to really lead with empathy here and be curious. Like, why do you feel that way? Oh, okay. Have you ever thought of this? Or tell me more about that. But if you just isolate them, they're not going to come to the center. It's just not going to happen.
You're not going to change people's minds by telling them how stupid they are, too.
Absolutely.
You just burn that bridge right away.
Yeah, people want to be treated with dignity.
Absolutely. Yeah, they never want to be forced into holding an opinion, too. And I think that's another thing that's kind of turned off a lot of people in like the Democratic politics, too, is you're telling them how to think and how to act. They can't say this, they can't say that. Maybe that's moral and that's how it should be, but you can't blame people for not wanting to do something differently that they've been accustomed to their whole life. Maybe it's inevitable that it's going to happen, but you got to be a little understanding that it's not as easy as you think it is, especially when you're not brought up and thinking that way too. Mm-hmm. So one of the many problems that we have to solve, but I think we're heading in the right direction though. Certainly I think this conversation will hopefully give people some motivation and reassurance that we're heading in the right direction.
I think so. I truly believe we're headed in the right direction. I think that the most divisive we've been is in the rear view mirror.
Yeah, I hope you're correct in that, but I think we will be. Yeah. My final question I have here is, what kind of world do you want your daughters to live and thrive in?
I think we are headed toward abundance globally. And what I mean by abundance is that we have extra food. Mm-hmm. We have a little bit of money in our pockets. There's an abundance of love and compassion and caring for one another around the world. It's the life that I live. It's the life that you have lived. And it's the life that most people who are living or listening to this have lived. I'm not talking opulence. I am not talking having 5 cars, sports cars, 10-bedroom house. No, abundance. And so I would love for my daughters to see a world where abundance is available for all. Not guaranteed. Where opportunity is available for all. Where people have a choice in who they are and how they want to live. Where there's an abundance of respect and dignity. That's the type of world that I want my daughters to live in. One of them is very interested in what I think she should do for a living. And I said, I don't care what you do. I do care how you live. And I want you to be kind and I want you to be loving. And if you can do those things, if you can be those things, I don't care what you do for a career. And that's not how she expected me to answer, but I truly believe that. I want her to see an abundance of kindness and love where there's opportunities for those who are willing to go out and seize them. So many people, and I mentioned this very, very early on in this conversation, Teddy. What would have happened with Teddy had he been able to go to a good school and had an environment where violence and anger weren't rewarded? Could his heart have turned out differently? I think so. And my purpose in life is to help people reach their potential. I've been trying to do that for the past 30 plus years. And there are some conditions that are required for people to pursue that. And I would like the conditions to be there for almost everybody in the world, all 8 billion, all 8.5 billion people, however many there are. That's the world I would love to live in.
You and me both. Don, thank you for sitting down with me. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to Youthful Perspectives. I hope you found this conversation as enlightening as I did. The 3 biggest takeaways for me center around Don's optimistic outlook on almost every topic we discussed. It's easy to succumb to the negative information social media and news algorithms promote, but we must all remember that throughout all of human history, this is by far the best time to be alive. I also appreciated Don's repeated use of the word empathy. It's important that we continuously attempt to metaphorically put ourselves in someone else's shoes, for I firmly believe that if we are to solve the problems that our country and the world currently face, empathy is vital in discovering the solutions. Finally, to those who currently find themselves within an organization or team, I hope you feel inspired to implement an environment similar to the Edmonton Oilers, an environment where everyone is treated with respect, from the Wayne Gretzkys to the ice rink janitors, working together towards a goal that's bigger than oneself. That's an environment I hope to thrive in someday, and I hope you do too. This is Mason Beerbaum, signing off.